economic force. Because Canada and the United States, that would really be something.
In the heart of America, on the windswept plains of Texas, cotton is no longer called white gold. It has become a white debt. Fields that fed entire towns for decades now stand half-hearted. Farmers walk among the stalks, looking at a crop that no one will buy.
An attack of any sort on this country is an attack on Canada as a member of the NATO alliance.
The price per bale has fallen below cost, warehouses are overflowing, and even the iron gates of old cotton mills are rusting from disuse. In a matter of months, a market that seemed unshakable has collapsed. And behind this collapse is not drought or hurricane, but economics and politics, which have shifted the center of power thousands of kilometers south. While America counts its losses, Brazil celebrates a record. Its fields, financed by cheap loans and new machinery, fill Chinese ships. In just one season, Brazil has overtaken the US to become the world's largest supplier of cotton. Chinese factories, once dependent on American fiber, are now signing contracts with Brazilian agricultural holdings. It's cheaper. It's longer. There's no risk of sanctions.
As a result of these developments, the breadth and the depth of the changes in U.S. trade policy have become more fully apparent.
For Beijing, this is not just business, it's strategy. By replacing American cotton, China has not only caused prices to plummet, but also knocked out one of the last export pillars of American agriculture. In Washington, they call it a silent war without shots, a trade maneuver that strikes at the very heart of the U.S. agricultural belt. Meanwhile, farmers are counting their losses. Fertilizers have become more expensive due to tariffs, fuel due to logistical disruptions, and loans due to rising interest rates. Every percentage point in expenses now determines who will survive and who will sell their land to the bank. The latest combined harvester costs $1 million, while a ton of cotton costs less than a packet of coffee.
In a positive and very important development earlier this month, just a few weeks ago, the United States reaffirmed a core commitment to our free trade agreement, CUSMA, by reinforcing that those Canadian exports to the United States that are compliant with that agreement, that are compliant with CUSMA, will not be subject to U.S. IEEPA tariffs.
In the White House, officials are discussing a rescue plan, emergency subsidies, low-interest loans, and the purchase of surplus crops. But the very idea is controversial. Some say that without help, entire regions will collapse. Others say it is only a postponement of the inevitable, an attempt to revive an industry that no longer has a place in the new global economy. Congress is arguing over numbers, while farmers are arguing with the weather. In the South, there are floods. In the West, there is drought. And more people are asking themselves, is it worth saving cotton at all? When the entire textile world has switched to synthetics and China is building polyester factories faster than America can print subsidies, a redistribution of power is taking place before the eyes of the whole world. Production chains are being rebuilt, trade routes are shifting, and even the familiar symbols of American prosperity are becoming reminders of a bygone era.
Those were quickly followed by reciprocal tariffs on every U.S. trade partner and very high sectoral tariffs applied globally on strategic industries, including steel, aluminum, autos, and copper.
But if all this is part of Beijing's long game, can Washington make even one move in response? Or will America once again pay billions to hold on to what it has already lost? Because behind every bale of cotton is more than just a crop. It is work, duty, family, and the memory of a country where farming was the foundation of the economy. Today, that foundation is cracking, and the question is no longer how much the government will pay, but what will be left to save when the money runs out.
This new U.S. trade policy has several motivations: to raise tariff revenues, to protect strategic industries, to encourage foreign investment in the United States, and to change trade and non-trade policy in U.S. partners.
On the plains of West Texas, the wind sounds like a reminder of changes that no one wanted. These lands were once called the heart of American cotton. Here, the harvest determined how much a house would cost, how many children would go to college, and what kind of pickup truck a farmer would buy next year. Now, instead of certainty, there is silence, dust, and thousands of acres of white fields that no one will harvest. The price of cotton has fallen below cost, and those who used to call it white gold are using a different word for the first time in decades: debt. Cotton silos are overflowing, warehouses are bursting at the seams, and many businesses have signs saying closed indefinitely. Over the course of a year, the market has lost a third of its value. Cotton futures have collapsed, and no one has been able to stop the decline. The problem is not just the weather, drought, or crop failure, it goes much deeper. The main buyer of American cotton, China, has quietly and decisively left the game. The usual contracts with Texas and Carolina producers have been replaced by new ones with Brazil. For many farmers, this was a blow on par with the disaster of the 1980s, when U.S. agriculture experienced mass bankruptcies. When analysts began to analyze the figures, it all looked like a premeditated operation. In a single season, Brazilian cotton shipments to China increased by almost 240%. In absolute terms, this amounts to tens of millions of bales. For the first time in history, the United States lost its leadership in the global market to Brazil. Chinese ports are now unloading ships coming not from Houston, but from Santos. Chinese textile companies are signing long-term agreements with Brazilian cooperatives, fixing prices at a level that American farmers simply cannot compete with.
And to these ends, the United States has announced a series of trade actions. Those began near the start of this year with the so-called IEEPA tariffs against Canada and Mexico based on U.S. concerns about the border and fentanyl trafficking.
Until recently, the US accounted for 42% of the Chinese market, but today that figure is around 17%, and the decline is not over yet. Each percentage point represents hundreds of farms, thousands of jobs, and millions of dollars in loans that cannot be repaid. While Americans are struggling to survive, Brazilians are expanding production. Their equipment is half the price, loans are subsidized by the state, and labor is several times cheaper. Solid contracts with Chinese state banks ensure low rates and stable demand.
In fact, the average U.S. tariff rate on the world has jumped from just over 2% at the end of last year to almost 16%, 8 times higher. 16% currently.
American farmers today are caught between two disasters, financial and technological. The latest John Deere cotton harvester costs almost $1 million, and even used equipment has become a luxury. Spare parts have become more expensive. Fuel has risen in price by 8%, fertilizers by 12%, and loans have almost doubled. In some counties, up to 15% of agricultural loans are already considered overdue. In the past, farmers could at least partially offset their losses by processing domestically. Today, even that is gone. American textile factories are closing one after another or switching to synthetic raw materials. In South Carolina, where cotton was the backbone of the economy for almost 2 centuries, e-commerce warehouses now operate. According to official data, domestic cotton consumption in the US has fallen by 75% in 20 years. 20 years ago, America processed its own harvest. Now, almost all cotton must find buyers abroad, but there are no more buyers abroad. While the US was losing ground, China was rebuilding its industry. Since 2018, its domestic production of synthetic fibers has doubled. Over the past 5 years, the country has increased its polyester production capacity to a level that exceeds the entire global cotton market. For Beijing, cotton is no longer a strategic commodity. Now it is just one of many options, and not the most profitable one. Polyester is cheaper, more resistant to price fluctuations, and, most importantly, does not depend on external weather conditions or geopolitics.
The United States has also imposed substantial trade actions on the Canadian lumber industry. Now, in recent weeks, the United States has agreed a series of trade deals with a variety of countries. And these deals have several aspects in common. First, baseline tariffs cover a broad range of goods and services that are substantially higher than those U.S. tariffs that existed before.
Some analysts in Washington openly call what is happening a quiet shock. In essence, China has simultaneously weakened 2 sectors of the US economy, agriculture and light industry. At the same time, there were no official sanctions or bans. Everything looked like a market process, only this market now lives by someone else's rules. But the problem is not limited to international trade. There is a domino effect within the country. Demand is falling, processors are closing, jobs are being cut, and fertilizer suppliers, logistics companies, and small banks are suffering. Along the roads where billboards once stood with the words "Proud to grow American cotton," there are now for sale banners. Climate shocks have added to the pressure on farmers. Texas and Arizona experienced one of the hottest springs in 30 years, followed by torrential rains that destroyed thousands of acres of crops. According to estimates by the Department of Agriculture, crop losses exceeded $1 billion. In some counties, the cotton simply rotted on the vine. Insurance companies are refusing to cover part of the losses, citing unforeseen climate fluctuations.
Those trade deals with other countries also have limited or no relief from those sectoral tariffs in those strategic industries such as steel and autos. They include substantial commitments by the U.S. trade partners for investments in the United States and significant unilateral trade liberalization measures.
Against this backdrop, proposals for large-scale subsidies are being heard on Capitol Hill. The Treasury Department is discussing the redistribution of tariff revenues up to $14 billion to help farmers. But experts warn that there is no such money. The fund from which funds are usually taken to support industries has only $4 billion at its disposal. If the government tries to expand subsidies, it may again face accusations of violating World Trade Organization rules. Back in 2005, the US lost a similar dispute with Brazil and was forced to pay nearly $300 million in compensation. Meanwhile, Brazil is not wasting any time. Its agricultural companies are buying new equipment, opening terminals, and building logistics centers near ports. One such terminal in the state of Mato Grosso is financed by the Chinese Development Bank. This is not just business, it is a new infrastructure of dependence. Every ton of cotton shipped from Brazil is now linked to Chinese investment and Chinese demand.
As in previous trade disputes, Canada has implemented a series of retaliatory tariffs. Their objectives have been to protect Canadian workers and businesses and to incentivize a negotiated settlement with the United States. Few other countries followed suit.
There is a growing sense of betrayal in American farming communities. People say that the state has left them alone to face global competition in which they have no chance. Reports from the Department of Agriculture say that domestic production remains at 18 million bales, while domestic consumption is less than 2 million. The difference of 5 million bales is sitting in warehouses. With each passing month, this cotton loses quality and value. Part of the stockpile has already been declared unclaimed, that is, effectively useless. Against the backdrop of these figures, China continues to strengthen its position. Its textile companies are increasing exports of finished clothing, and state funds are investing in the processing of Brazilian raw materials. This is a double blow. Americans are losing not only fiber exports, but also their share of the finished product market. For global brands, from H&M to Zara, Brazilian cotton is now simply more profitable. Economists say that America is experiencing not a temporary downturn, but a structural shift. The industry that underpinned part of the rural economy of the South is losing its raison d'etre. For farmers, this is not an abstraction, it is their livelihoods, loans, homes, and family farms that are 100 years old. Step by step, a system that seemed eternal is collapsing. China did not impose sanctions or terminate contracts, it simply stopped buying. Brazil did not wage war, it simply offered better products at better prices. And now, on the windy plains of Texas, farmers stand between the past and the future, a past where cotton was a symbol of prosperity, and a future where even the most fertile field does not guarantee survival.
Specifically, under the new U.S. approach, countries must now buy access to the world's largest economy through a combination of tariffs, investments, unilateral trade liberalization, and policy changes in their home markets.
America has grown accustomed to believing that its agriculture is invincible. But global markets know no patriotism. They obey numbers. And when the numbers no longer add up, even white gold turns to dust. American cotton found itself trapped not only by prices, but also by technology. After Chinese orders disappeared, farmers tried to find a way out through efficiency, but each new step only increased their debts. The cost of fuel and fertilizers continued to rise, equipment aged, and loans became more expensive. Modern cotton harvesters, which once symbolized American superiority in agricultural technology, became an unbearable burden. Farmers who bought them on credit were now unable to pay them off or sell them. Even used combines were too expensive for new farms to afford. The irony was that across the ocean, in Brazil, farmers were buying the same models for half the price, thanks to subsidized loans and direct investments from Chinese banks. The technological gap was becoming systemic. American machines required regular maintenance, expensive spare parts and software, which was now more expensive due to new tariffs on imported electronic components. Mechanics complained that a simple breakdown in the field turned into a disaster if a part from Europe or Asia was needed. One farmer from Arkansas told reporters that his equipment had been idle for 3 weeks because the manufacturer could not deliver a control module. During that time, he lost almost his entire crop. Such stories were becoming more and more common.
In a positive and very important development earlier this month, just a few weeks ago, the United States reaffirmed a core commitment to our free trade agreement, CUSMA, by reinforcing that those Canadian exports to the United States that are compliant with that agreement, that are compliant with CUSMA, will not be subject to U.S. IEEPA tariffs.
With each passing year, not only did profitability decline, but so did confidence in the system that had supported agriculture for decades. Crop insurance programs, credit lines, fuel subsidies, all of this was based on the assumption that the market was stable and there would always be a buyer. When that buyer disappeared, the entire infrastructure was unprepared for the new reality. Banks began to raise interest rates, and many farmers received notices of loan revisions. Over the past 2 years, the number of bankruptcy filings among agricultural enterprises has grown by almost 40%. Meanwhile, American textile factories, once the pride of the South, were closing their doors one after another. Fabric manufacturers were switching to polyester and other synthetic fibers that were not dependent on seasonality and international prices. What was once considered an advantage, naturalness, quality, tradition, has now become a weakness. In Georgia, North Carolina, and Alabama, entire industrial parks have become ghost towns. In the evenings, their windows are lit only by security lights, and signs advertising their sale hang above the gates. Locals say that even the smell of cotton, that warm, dusty aroma that used to fill the streets of southern towns, has disappeared. Instead, there is now the smell of concrete and machine oil from warehouses housing logistics companies and cheap imported goods. Against this backdrop, the administration in Washington began to talk about the need for intervention. The word intervention, once heard only in the context of financial crises, has now become commonplace. Options were discussed: direct payments to farmers, preferential loans, and the government buying up surplus cotton. Some officials suggested using the surplus raw materials for the needs of the army and medicine, in the production of protective materials, and in emergency reserves. But calculations showed that this would cost tens of billions of dollars, and even in such a scenario, only part of the market could be saved. Debates flared up in the halls of Congress. Conservative senators argued that endless subsidies created the illusion of salvation, but in reality only delayed the inevitable collapse. Their opponents responded that without government support, not only the agricultural sector but the entire economy of rural states would go bankrupt. On the one hand, there was the free market argument. On the other, the fear of social unrest. Committee meetings were filled with chilling statistics. In some counties, up to 25% of jobs depend directly on the cotton industry. The Treasury Department considered using the revenue from tariffs imposed during the trade wars with China to partially finance the aid. However, economists warned that these funds would not even cover half of the necessary payments. Moreover, the resumption of subsidies threatened to cause a diplomatic scandal. Brazil has already filed a request with the WTO to U.S. support measures, hinting that they again violate the rules of fair competition. Behind the scenes, there was talk that if Washington repeated the mistakes of the past, Brazil could win the case again, as it did in the mid-2000s, and demand hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. The situation was exacerbated by the domestic political context. In the run-up to the elections, the issue of aid to farmers became a symbol of the struggle for votes in the southern states. Some candidates promised to restore the greatness of American cotton, while others spoke of the need for restructuring, switching new crops, reducing dependence on exports, and investing in domestic processing. But to farmers, these words sounded like empty slogans. They were not concerned with the dollar exchange rate or global politics, but with how to pay off loans for equipment and pay their workers. Meanwhile, the numbers continued to deteriorate. The cost of producing one bale exceeded the sale price by 20 to 25%. In some regions, losses per hectare reached $100. Millions of tons of unsold raw materials accumulated in warehouses, losing quality and market value over time. Experts warned that if new sales channels did not appear in the coming months, part of the harvest would simply have to be destroyed. In this chaos, trade wars with China turned from a tool of pressure into a boomerang. Tariffs, which were supposed to strengthen American industry, made imports of fertilizers and machinery more expensive than ever. Metal, electronics, even packaging materials, everything became more expensive. As a result, farmers paid for protection from China with their own money. Some observers called it a patriotism tax. Others called it economic self-sabotage.